Hey everybody, this is Alan Peterson with Meet the Thriller Author, and I'm really excited for today's chat with Eric Rickstad. He is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author behind the Remote series. These books are a mix of high-stakes suspense with some fascinating real-life inspired stuff like CIA remote viewing programs, which we'll get into it during the interview. Eric, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So before we get into all that good stuff, I'd love to start at the beginning. What inspired you to start writing stories, and how did it eventually lead to like thrillers and suspense?
Yeah. I've always been a big reader since I was, able to read, and early on, reading stuff like Encyclopedia Brown or Roald Dahl, or a little later on Poe, or but even third grade or so, um, I loved reading so much. I wanted to know how it was you could affect someone with words on a page, that you can make someone scared, or you could make them cry, or you can make them laugh, or all of those at once. And in fifth grade I was in a literary lunch, where once a week, myself and like six others of us with the librarian would discuss the current book we were reading. We would pick a book. It was like a book club. And so I just started writing very early on, and then, had some success when I was in college publishing short stories in literary magazines and the like. And one day I was writing what I thought was another short story, and I was 40 pages in and not even through the first scene. So I was like, I think I'm working on a novel. And I've always been interested for various reasons in crime and criminality, but also in victimhood, and those who are victimized and what that does to a person. So I've always had a combination of, that thriller, suspense, crime, but also the implications of it and the impact and the aftermath of that. So sort of distinguishes my work a little bit from others. I'm not interested in just a body count, that's, that type of thing. But the first that novel ended up getting published. I didn't even tell anyone I was working on a novel, because who isn't, right? Oh, what do you know?
Yeah,
I'm working on a
sure.
novel. I'm working on my novel. Oh, of course you are. So, one thing just led to another, and I kept writing them and getting them published, and had some really great success with some of them, and just it's just gone from there. Ended up doing what it was I hoped I might do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you guys started pretty young then, really. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And my mom worked at a hardware store, and so, I'd stop in after school and on the weekends and stuff to check in with her. And there was always someone telling stories there. It was like a center of town, where, they'd go in and buy some grass seed and, some wrenches, and end up staying for a half an hour because they were, you know, all telling stories. So I was around that sort of oral tradition a lot. My mom was really big into reading as well, and film noir and Hitchcock and stuff. So that also informed sort of that the bent that I have toward the darker crime sort of genres.
Yeah, and then I was reading your bio, so you live in Vermont, and I know and your books are set in Vermont, especially like small towns, like you were just mentioning now. I want to ask you about that. So, what is it about that setting that makes such a great background for your books?
I think, at first naturally it just came from writing from sort of what was around me and what I knew and stuff. But then, there's especially the Northeast, and some in, the Catskills and stuff of New York. But New England has that tradition of sort of the Gothic woods, and things lurking in the woods, and small towns, and they're very picturesque, and I, sort of a ideal picturesque places to live. But there's humans there too, so there's other things going on. There's people who mean other people ill, and who are pretending to be good citizens, and every once in a while growing up, you'd find out about so and so, and be, that was in trouble for this or that, and I had a friend that ended up uh, that I grew up with become, a violent criminal, and none of us really understood it. And so there's always that, like the David Lynch or the Stephen King, whatever way they approach that underbelly of that picturesque small town place that, you know, where if humans live, then it's possible that you know, human crime and violence can take place, and then how that affects the town, not just the individual, but the town. Um, and so it's right with just material and that brooding, gloomy sense of the woods itself and isolation and things like that.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, but you mentioned Poe and some of the earlier writers that influenced you. What about like when you start thinking about it now, like writing for thrillers and suspense and horror, which kind of authors influenced you the most as a writer?
Dennis Lehane was huge, back around the, early 2000s and stuff when he was really rocking a lot of really great novels. Not that he still isn't, but that just when sort of he was just before with Mackenzie and just sort of before his books were made into movies. I was really, he was very influential, because he has a literary bent. He really takes his time crafting, the words and the sentence structure itself, and immersing you in the Boston area. And I lived in Boston, and I liked how he really took his time, um, and wasn't afraid to, sort of set the stage and immerse you in these places. Whereas a lot of crime and thrillers, it's just let's go, we don't have time to linger on a neighborhood in Charleston. We don't have to, let's just stick, really tight to the action. And I liked that, and I enjoyed that a lot. And I enjoy like Tanya French and Kate Atkinson and those that are really steeped in location and setting and even just, every little thing a character does, the car they drive, the clothes they wear, how they speak. Um, I like writers that sort of take the time to do that, even in, quote unquote genre fiction. And um, that just appeals to me as a reader and a writer.
So looking back, like I said, you started publishing short stories when you were a long time ago. You were
Yeah.
younger, and when you look back at your debut novel, Reap, I was kind of curious because you've been at it for a while. How has your writing style or process evolved during all those years? Is it pretty much the same, or does it keep evolving?
Um, it has evolved, or with different novels, I sometimes have a different voice. My novel Lilith was a departure. It was first person. It was present tense. Most of my writing had tended to be third person, past tense, and multiple points of view. Um, and that's primarily how I still write. Although, Lilith, I am not who you think I am. We're both, first person throughout the whole, with one point of view. I think Lilith was the biggest departure as far as writing style and voice and how much it differed from what I've done. But Remote, even though those are set sort of across the whole country and sometimes it's, very suburban or urban areas, um, I think the emphasis on language and trying to really immerse the reader remains somewhat the same, of not being afraid to set up a scene and linger in a scene to develop more than just, the plot or suspense, and letting some suspense come from, you know, a character's background or their interactions, their personal interactions, and ramping up the tension and suspense in other ways. I think of Dennis Lehane and scenes where, they're just investigating, Mackenzie's investigating, and there's great undercurrent of violence within the scene that never necessarily takes place as they're, interviewing people in these, seedy areas of some of these neighborhoods. And, you sort of breathe a sigh of relief when they're out of that situation. The suspense comes just from that interaction, um, that it's possible at any time that things could go really awry.
Yeah,
But I think overall, the writing, with a few exceptions, has remained somewhat the same, and establishing the things I like to establish, and trying to write as well as I can without letting the writing also get in the way, where it's just about a pretty sentence or whatever. So
yeah, that yeah, I don't know how that one goes.
yeah.
I was wondering with regards to to the remote series. So it's very fascinating. Can you tell us about like when you first started to get the idea about that and talk a little bit? Did it start out with like the CIA psychic programs? Can you tell us a little bit about how that all came to be?
Yeah, that I've always been interested in those CIA sort of programs back in the 50s and
Yeah.
60s. I mean, they had legitimate, funded programs with let's give some of our agents mega doses of LSD and see what happens. That's not fiction. They did that. It's the records are there, and the things have been released to demonstrate that. And I was watching Wormwood, uh, a documentary about that, and a CIA agent who had died, and his son has since thought that the CIA had something very literally to do with that death. It was intriguing, and then at the same time, they were actually, very much involved in investigating and experimenting with the ability to remote view. Someone that can supposedly see events that are taking place in real time. From great distances, even around halfway around the world. Um, and they had a program for about 10 years of exploring that, partly because they believed the Soviet Union at the time was doing the same thing, which they very well may have. And so that had just intrigued me. And there were some anecdotal instances of in cases where maybe this person really did have an impact on solving this case or catching this person, because um, they said they could do it, and it seemed like they proved they could do it. And I just liked that idea. And I'm a skeptic and a cynic of those sorts of things. So I had fun with sort of this character that's in remote, needing to prove to me as the writer, but prove to sort of the reader and his colleague that he ends up being put with in the FBI, needing to convince this sort of FBI agent to, like, well, I don't want to work this guy. I'm not buying it, but I have to prove to me that what you say you can do is legitimate, and I'll start to maybe believe you and work with you.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. It reminded me a lot of X-Files with Mulder and Scully, like the relationship between Lucas Stark and Granier.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. I like that how they played off each other. The trust in there is that I know you say that's important to you, the building the characters and all that. How did that all come together for you too as well? How do you keep track of that? We do you were you thinking about it before as you're writing it, or do you plan that all out?
I usually don't plan it out. I did some with this because of, it being new material, and I had not written an FBI
Mm.
book, because it's very much an FBI manhunt, cat and mouse, real thriller. And there were, you know, things that I'd never written about, like it's the FBI procedure and what they do and what they can do. So I spoke with a couple FBI agents who had been with the FBI for 25 or 30 years, a married couple that had been in the FBI together, and learned a lot in that regard. But once I start writing, even if I were to, outline hard and fast, and somehow had put all on page, like this is what happens in each chapter, which I've never done, but I know I would depart from that anyway, because once you start writing, it's sort of as, takes on its own life and the characters, and you get better ideas than what you originally had anyway, and more specific ideas because of how things are unfolding. That wouldn't work now anyway. So that, I mean, then that's the fun of a great appeal to writing itself is the discovery of where things are going. So I sort of set the stage, and with these two characters that were at opposing ends of the spectrum, how to approach a case forced together and trying to find this person who's killing families and arranging them in strange tableaus in their houses, um, and went from there. And, really not knowing exactly how I was going to work my way out of it, um, which I enjoy backing myself in corners
Oh
and
yeah,
trying to find my way out.
yeah, yeah, a brave writer. Looking at that was another thing too. What really drew me when I first started reading the synopsis for your book was that you tackle some of the genre myths of serial killer thriller types.
Yeah.
That was important to you, and I saw that when I was reading. I read The Six, the first one.
Oh, yeah. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, so and that was cool because it was interesting. I mean, I love the Silence of the Lambs and all those type of thrillers and the more even the more trope following ones.
Right.
Is that something but were you worried about that? You don't you want to blow up some of the those myths from that we've seen in books and movies, but you want to entertain. Is that something you're thinking
Yeah.
about?
So, I mean, it was fun to me to, I mean, and I love Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, all of those. A little more recently, Mindhunter, and I was bummed when they canceled it after two seasons. But I did have fun with this agent, Lucas Stark, who wants nothing to do with, a remote viewer or a psychic, as he puts it, or any of that, but also with sort of he's at odds, let's say professionally, with the behavioral sciences department and profiling in general, in that it has taken on sort of an iconic um, pop culture, trope
Mhm.
where, it's believed by most that profiling really helps specifically to find and arrest and apprehend people, but really it's more of a peripheral um, help to maybe trying to figure out who this person might be, what their tendencies might be, rather than, oh, if you can just, give us enough information from the profiler, then we'll just knock on their door and show up. We'll figure it out without any real police work or investigative work. And so I had fun sort of dismantling some of the myth that is out just in pop culture of the profiler with a capital P, and making it more of, the profiler who helps out. And the character Lucas Stark makes a point of saying, well, none of them, we always sort of associate two profilers with serial killers, and they help with a lot more than that, other cases, but and sort of the high, very infamous serial killers, but none of them were ever apprehended through profiling, at all. The Son of Sam, had one, a bad parking ticket and
Yeah.
some other things that played into it. And, the BTK basically couldn't resist 20 years later, taunting the police again until they were able to figure out. And Ted Bundy, it was, because, victim escaped and said, he's got this kind of weird uh, colored VW that's sort of a coppery color, and, he gets pulled over for a bad taillight on that VW, and he's caught, so um, he's very much against it, this character, and says, if Ted Bundy had been profiled, he would have been a basement dweller, non-social, poorly educated, all of these things, and he was anything but. He was this charming, educated, very articulate, sociable person. So I had fun with that and dismantling it some through this character.
Yeah. Yeah, I was when I was doing my little research before the interview, I saw that Don Winslow called remote Mindhunter with the volume turned up. That's gotta be pretty Cool. How is it when you get endorsements like that?
No, it's great. I mean, he's one of the best, and I've loved his work for a long time too. And along with like Lahane, and Savages in particular, I really liked, and his his whole trilogy that he did, and um, he's got another one out now of short stories, and yeah, it's wonderful to get someone of Don's stature and someone I'm a big fan of to say that about my work for sure.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that too. You mentioned that you talked to the FBI agents, and I know that in the acknowledgments of your book, you had you also sought the help of a Vermont state troop detective friend of
Yeah.
yours. So
Yeah.
how so kind of curious, how is the research? How much research do you do, and just how do you find these people?
Yeah, with the FBI, two people in the FBI, which who were just helpful beyond, like I couldn't have written it without their help, and their generosity and specificity. And I had hours long phone conversations with them where I could ask them anything at all about surveillance and tactical gear and legalities and warrants and protocol and what would they do if there was you know uh, victims that seem to be connected to a certain crime. What sort of threshold did it have to pass to them being, yes, this is part of our case, even though it's in a different state. So that was through a friend of a friend who, he said, "Hey, my friend knows these people, and I think and so that was great." And then my friend, who's the homicide detective here in Vermont, and Vermont's a small state, and he basically goes to every single homicide or violent, you high level crime anywhere in the state. And I met him, uh, even though we're in the same small town. I hadn't met him until he and I were uh, little league coaches for the same team. We neither one of us had ever been little league coaches, and when I signed up my son, who's in his daughter's class. He signed up his daughter, and then you fill out the checkbox. Would you like to volunteer? And he had checked out, yes, I'll volunteer, and I checked, I'll volunteer, thinking, I'll work at the food truck, or I'll help, I'll help bring keep the dugout organized. Well, we both got um, ended up the only two volunteers, so we were the coaches. And then when we met cleaning out the shack in the spring, we got to know each other and just discovered we both like deer hunting and stuff. And then he's like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm a crime writer. I write about murders." And I'm like, what do you do?" He's like, "Well, I'm the state's lead homicide detective." So it was really funny. And I just hung out with him 2 days ago, here on the other morning. And any question I have, I can ask him anytime. Text him. I'm text him frequently. Hey, what would happen if? And there were certain circumstances in remote where I was sort of pinned down and backed myself in a corner. And I said, I don't know if they could do this legally or what would make sense. And he walks me through it. And sometimes I don't mind because it is fiction that, well, it probably couldn't happen in real life, but I'm going to let it go. If there's just no workaround and I'm in this scenario, and other times he'll help me with, well, here's another thing to consider, and he's been a great help. Or when we're picking up our kids at school, we're hanging out, waiting for him to come out. If I have a question, I'll ask him. And he's also helped me get a good insight into sort of the real sort of nuts and bolts of being a homicide detective in a smaller region,
Mhm.
um, when he says, I gotta go to work after I pick up my daughter. I know what that means. There's been a murder, and he's got to go 3 hours. So a lot of for him is with the job is, he might have to go 3 hours north of the Canada border of Vermont in a snowstorm. And so he's got to figure out how to get there as quickly as he can, even though you can't drive fast, and find a babysitter and all these very practical things that help me ground a character now, you know.
Mhm.
When he's like, well, I'm more interested in I gotta find it. We gotta find a babysitter. My wife's a teacher. She can't drop her off or pick her up because she's in a different district. And so those are things that I had never really thought about practically.
Mhm.
And now, they add that realism to police officers and detectives that I write because it gives it that insight that you can't really get anywhere else except from someone who does it.
Yeah, something I've interviewed a lot of authors who were police officers, detectives, and stuff, and
Yep.
FBI agents, and they always say that usually in the books they're always like no families, they can go anywhere, like no problem.
Right, right.
Well, I love that part that you like. It's like makes it a lot more realistic. There's a lot, just to get
Yeah,
to.
Lucas Stark, they're always balancing, and trying to figure out, what, they have families, they have
Mhm.
kids. Um, you know,
Yeah.
it's for me, it's helpful to have them have those kind of lives.
I was reading when I was regarding your writing process now. I'm going to shift here a little bit.
Yep.
I read that you like to do a lot of when you first get started on a project, like with handwritten notes. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because now in a
Yeah,
digital.
most of my novels I've written almost in their entirety first draft in notebooks with a
Wow.
pencil. I like a pencil. I like to be outside as much as possible, so that frees me up to do that. So I can work, even if it's just on my back deck or whatever. But sometimes I'll write somewhere else. Like, if my son has a practice that I'm watching, soccer practice or baseball practice or something, and I'll bring a notebook and jot down some ideas. But I have boxes and boxes and boxes of notebooks of every kind, you could imagine, from the last 20 years. And there's something about the physicality of it that I like. And I like being able to, it's sort of like with your iPhone, not that, you want to, but you can't, you can't slam an iPhone down on somebody, right?
Yeah,
When we grew up, you could hang up. When you got hung up on,
you knew
there's
it.
a line that been crossed by both people that, it was a real, and so, hitting the delete key and backing up doesn't have the same feel as scratching something out and Xing it out or drawing an arrow. Oh, circle this paragraph and draw an arrow down here. This is where it really belongs. Or just Xing out a whole page because it's just not working. And I like that. And the connection helps my thought process too, my creativity in a way that just writing a first draft wholesale into, you know, onto my laptop in a Word doc just doesn't have.
So now I'm curious, how many notebooks is it for like a 70, 80, 90,000 word?
It's quite a few. It's probably, if it was like just a regular, college rules, composition
Mhm.
notebook, um, it'd probably be four or five of those.
And what's the
Yeah.
process that once you're done, do you like then type it into your laptop or how does
So yeah, and sometimes I'll get to a certain point and be like, I gotta really type some of this in because I don't, I've never gone like where I've written all the way through to the end and then said, now I'll type it in because it's a lot of strain to like look at it, try to even read my own handwriting, which is horrible. It's like reading 80,000 word prescription, by your doctor. So I'll get, four or five chapters and then start typing them in. And then while I am typing them, I'm editing too. Like I won't, I never have like just typed it in verbatim. I can't help but start to change it
Mhm.
and write it a little, in a way that I feel is better or leaving something off that's in the notebook and just leaving it in the notebook because I don't think it works now or whatever. Um, but yeah, I usually get so far and then like I really got to catch up with myself sort of and spend an afternoon or a day, writing in 10,000 words or 20 or whatever it is, and then resuming in the notebooks.
And then that process when you go digital? Is that use Microsoft Word?
Yeah, just in a Word doc. And by then, so by the time I have it typed in, it's the second draft
Hmm.
because
I was just
um,
thinking about that. So yeah, that's a great way. So that by that time you're already ready. You're already on the second draft.
yeah, I'm already on the second draft and I feel it's closer and tighter. And then I do a lot of drafts. I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite.
So how long is the process from the time that you first crack open that notebook till you're ready to send it off to your editor? How long does that usually take you for a book like Remote 5, Remote to 6?
It varies. I'd say on average, a year and a half
Mhm.
or so. I mean, the book Lilith took me 10 years to write on and off. Reap took me about three. That was my first one. But on average, probably a year and a half to two. Some I've written in, 10 months because they were just right there for me. And I, was off and running, the Canaan Crime Series, the second book in that. By the time I finished the first one, I knew I just kept writing,
Mhm.
basically. Um, and so that came really quickly because I was right in the wheelhouse for it. But probably a year and a half overall.
And so the first two remote books are out now. Are you working on a third? What are you working on now? Can you give us a little sneak peek?
I have another novel that I've completed and hopefully be working on more remote.
Hmm.
Yep. And I'm always working on one thing or another, short stories and stuff too.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So before I let you go, I always ask my guests because I have aspiring writers that listen to this. Any advice to anyone listen to this that wants to write thrillers and suspense?
One of the big things is read really wide
Mhm.
and deep. Read not just fiction and not just the fiction you're writing. Read all over the place, nonfiction, poetry, the cereal box. I mean, I was always reading as a kid. It's like I couldn't sit and eat breakfast without reading something. And a lot of times it was a cereal box or it was the newspaper link or whatever it was. And then also try to get somewhat of consistency. If you can't, because, I worked for years where I was getting up at 4 in the morning before work and writing for 3 hours before getting ready for work, or I'd write after my wife went to sleep. But if you can get some consistency, and it's sort of like doing, I think of it as sort of athletics for your mind, where, you know, if you want to get in really good shape, say, or be good at a certain sport, the more you can consistently do it, the better your training. And so, um, even if it's a half an hour a day, you know, write for a half an hour and try to do it every day or as consistently as you can. If you can't do that, that's just how life is, But if you can, try to build a routine, because it's sort of like, you know, if you want to get in shape, you're probably not going to get in great shape if, well, I can do it Saturday
Mhm.
and I'll work out for 6 hours on Saturday. It's just a consistency, and that might work for writing. And if it's all you have, that's great. Is 6 hours on Saturday, go for it. But I think to write is routinely keeps that mind going, and a lot of the writing happens when, quote unquote, you're not writing. And that's where the consistency of putting pen to paper or writing in your Word doc every day keeps the story going in your head more, um, every day than if you only wrote, 6 hours every other week or something. You have to kind of come back to it.
Yeah, that's the worst when you stop for a while and you try to come back to it. It's just like, oh, it's like
Yeah,
starting,
like with anything
starting
else,
over.
it's trickier for
Yeah.
sure.
All right, Eric. Well, thank you so much. Where can listeners find you? Do you have what's your website or where can they find
Uh,
info
so
about you?
my website is ericrickstad.com, and then I'm on Twitter now and again, and I'm on Instagram as Eric Rickstad author, and on uh, Twitter it's just Eric Rickstad.
All right,
All in
great. All right, Eric. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Thank you.